Good afternoon. On behalf of all of us at the National Glass Association, thank you for making time in your day to join us for this month's installment of Thirsty Thursday. Before we get started, we have a few NGA updates for you. Registration is open for the NGA Glass Conference taking place January 24th to 26th in Long Beach, California. We'll return to our more traditional meeting format featuring committee work and updates with presentations reflecting our task group efforts. There will be plenty of opportunities to catch up with your glass industry friends as well at an opening reception at the Aquarium of the Pacific, our traditional volunteer celebration dinner, as well as the optional golf scramble and the 7th annual fun run. NGA is excited to announce the publication of the first resource in a new series of technical offerings, the Best Practices for Bird-Friendly Glazing Design Guide. The objective of this 15-page guide is to facilitate, simplify, and accelerate the decision-making process for all stakeholders and fill the void when legislation doesn't exist or seems vague. Look for another design guide coming soon on frameless shower enclosures. And we're going back to Nashville in March for the 24th annual BEC conference and are excited to use the opportunity to co-locate with GPAD, Glass Processing Automation Days. There will be independent programming targeted to the unique audiences of each event, plus special joint sessions on March 29th to bridge the supply chain in order to facilitate stronger bonds among glazing contractors, fabricators, and suppliers. Registration opens in early December, and tabletop displays, Take 5 presentations, and sponsorship opportunities are available now. I'm now pleased to introduce our speaker, Tom Zaremba. Tom is a partner at Retzel and Andress and works as a code consultant for NGA. Tom has more than 30 years experience representing Fortune 500 companies in civil litigation and in restructurings, reorganizations, and insolvency proceedings. Tom's practice focuses on all aspects of the development of building codes and standards, including proceedings before the DOE, EPA, the International Code Council, NFRC, NFPA, ASHRAE, ANSI, the California Energy Commission, and numerous other forums. His clients include a number of worldwide glass manufacturers and trade associations representing the glass industry. Tom, welcome.
Sarah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
You sound good.
Fantastic. Well, if you're in Denver or west, good morning. If you're further east than that, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm pleased to be here. And we're going to talk about one of the most important building events that happened in 2021. And that was the Champlain or the Portside Surfside Tower collapse in Florida. If you can just imagine for a moment being asleep in your bed on the 10th floor, the 5th floor, the 1st floor, or even the 13th floor of a condominium building, and the breezes are coming in over the ocean and the palm trees are swaying, and all of a sudden the building collapses out from under you, basically killing virtually everyone that was in that tower of this 40-plus-year-old building. Now, the interesting thing about it is that nothing like this in the United States has been known to have happened, where an entire building just suddenly collapsed for inexplicable reasons. This happened on June 24th. 98 people were killed. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly referred to as NIST, immediately began an investigation. And so far, a total of 5 other buildings in the area of Broward County where this happened have been evacuated due to safety concerns. The building owner, through architects and designers, submits construction drawings. And those construction drawings are given to the building code officials, the planning department typically in a city, to determine whether or not from just the drawings, can we issue a construction permit? Do the drawings show compliance with current code? If they do, then a building permit is typically issued for the building. And as construction continues, the building code official inspects electrical, structural, energy, any number, plumbing, any number of components to the building itself. If, for example, there are fire-rated components, for example, fire resistance rated exits throughout the building, and duct work that is necessary to ventilate the building in the event of a fire, those areas have to remain open until typically the building code official has had an opportunity to inspect them and make sure they meet code before you can continue with construction. But eventually, when the building is built and all the inspections are over, a certificate of occupancy is issued, and that is where the building code official's authority ends. Now, the Surfside building had stood there for over 40 years. It was in serious state of disrepair. There are 2 counties in Florida that require periodic building inspections after the passage of time. But let's talk a little bit about Florida, because that's where, first of all, this happened. And as you'll see later in the presentation, there are literally millions of people living in condominium complexes throughout the state of Florida. So it has some unique features. Is Florida the same as everywhere else? Does the building code official's authority end when an occupancy permit is issued? Well, the answer is it is kind of the same, but it's not. Because there have been previous disasters that have occurred in Florida, one of which occurred on March 27th in 1981. And in that case, the Harbor K condominiums in Cocoa Beach were under construction, but collapsed before the building was built. The collapse occurred due to numerous construction errors that deviated from the construction drawings that had been approved for the building. And numerous workers, no occupants, because no occupancy permit had been issued, but numerous construction workers died in that catastrophic event. Interestingly, that was the same year that the Surfside building that would collapse this year started construction. In any event, the Harbor K condominium failure resulted in what is known in Florida as the threshold inspection law. That was added to the building codes in 1981, and it requires all structural elements of large occupancy buildings with 500 or more occupants, anticipated occupants, to be inspected by a third-party threshold inspector to ensure compliance with the building drawings as it is being built. However, even after this catastrophic event, nothing in Florida's threshold law extended the authority of the building code official past the issuance of the initial certificate of occupancy. Then Florida had a second defining catastrophic event in 1992. Hurricane Andrew struck, destroying more than 25,000 homes. And as this quote provides from the Washington Post in 2017, Hurricane Andrew revealed loopholes in the building code and exposed lax enforcement and forced a reckoning that resulted in Florida enacting some of the toughest storm-specific building codes in the United States. Okay, so we're going to go through another round of modifications of the building codes in Florida. Guess what? They did nothing. Even though they enhanced the storm-specific provisions, they did nothing to require post-occupancy building inspections. So far, Miami-Dade and Broward counties in Florida are the only places that require a recertification inspection. And those are required after 40 years following the issuance of the building occupancy permit. So what's going to happen now that the Surfside building is collapsed? Well, when this presentation was originally put together, we really had no idea. We felt that probably specific compliance periods, potential penalties for non-compliance, and some other things, recertifications, would be required. But we really didn't know what was going to happen. But now we have a little bit better idea. Next slide, please. Because the Florida Bar Association, within the last 10 days, issued a task group report specifically to address how to avoid having another Surfside building collapse in Florida occur again. The Florida Bar Association's recommendations applied, first of all, to condominium complexes. They don't say what size, they don't say how many occupants or how many units, but they apply it. These recommendations were specific to condominium complexes. And as you can see from this slide, Florida has more than 1.5 million residential condos. And of those, nearly 600,000 are at least 40 years old, with an estimated 2 million people living in condominiums that are 30 years old or older. In other words, a lot of Floridians are living in these aging buildings. So the Bar Association's task force recommended structural inspections every 5 years. This would provide, they felt, timely notice of any significant deterioration and give condominium associations time to budget for repairs. They also realized that strengthening reserves, condominium reserves, was incredibly important. The condominium association at Surfside was in the process of assessing its unit owners to do the repair work necessary when the complex collapsed. And those assessments ranged from $80,000 per unit and up to put this building back in shape. So imagine you've bought say $1 million condominium in one of these buildings. The next thing you know is your condominium association has come to you and said, we have some structural deficiencies in our building. You're going to have to ante up $80,000 as your share to improve and repair the property. They knew, the Bar Association, that that's a pretty difficult pill to make the unit owners swallow. And in the Surfside case, resulted in significant delays between the identification of the deficiencies in the building and any repairs being conducted. So the Bar Association has recommended that loopholes that currently exist in Florida law, and frankly, every other state's condominium laws, be plugged, and that the evaluations that are done to establish adequate reserves for the condominium association to complete major structural repairs like those that were required at Surfside would make it easier. It would also potentially allow the condominium associations, if they had a large fund of money in reserve, to borrow additional funds to make needed repairs. The final bullet point, if you will, or takeaway from what the Florida Bar Association has recommended is significant increase in transparency so that condo boards, the residents and government officials that are involved in building inspections would all see and get copies of these re-inspections or recertification inspections that they recommend being conducted every 5 years. The idea being here that the more eyes that are on it, and first of all, it makes the unit purchasers aware of what they may be looking at in the future in respect to costs for repairs. And it also lends itself to newspaper reporting and the identification and publication of deficiencies in buildings. So the transparency they felt was a very important component of changing the laws that have, they believe, resulted in allowing this Surfside catastrophe to result. Just this morning, the architects and engineers came forward with a task group report. And this particular one is really very prestigious because it has as its members Florida Engineering Society, American Council of Engineering Companies of Florida, Florida Structural Engineers Association, and so on, including, by the way, the Building Officials Association of Florida. Those are the guys who inspect these buildings. So they are on board with the recommendations that just came out this morning from this task group. This task group took a different approach. They, first of all, not only would apply their recommendations to condominiums, but to all large buildings situated in the state of Florida. And they are talking about being inspections for structural problems in the first 30 years with a follow-up every 10. They are also talking about even shorter periods of time, 20 years recertifications with follow-ups every 7 years, if the building is within 3 miles of salt water. And as I said, these inspections would not only apply to condominiums, but also to office buildings and any other structure that exceeds 10 occupants or has greater than 2,000 square feet. The only real buildings that would be exempt would be 1- and 2-family dwellings and townhouses, 3 stories or smaller. So the inspections they're recommending would be conducted in 2 phases. A phase 1 inspection would be visual. It would sample, for example, 33% of the balconies and handrails, and would include random inspections of garages, pool decks, roof parapets, common areas, and accessible exterior areas of the structure. If any significant structural issue was discovered during the phase 1, that would then necessarily be followed by a phase 2 inspection, which would be done by an experienced architect engineer, and that would be far more thorough and potentially even include some destructive testing. So all this takes us back to, if the building codes and building inspections don't apply following the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, what codes do govern existing buildings? And in a word, the existing building code governs construction changes to any existing building. Now, there is no requirement that you apply the existing building code unless legislation, for example, that being recommended by the Bar Association and the engineers and architects in Florida, passes the state legislature and becomes an addition to the building code, so that unless there's additional legislation requiring in mid-life cycle inspections of buildings, nothing requires the existing building code to apply to any existing building. The only time it would apply is if a building owner goes to the planning division of the building, city's building codes officials, and submits drawings to do repairs or alterations, do a building addition or a change of occupancy. If you go to the building code officials with plans to do some kind of change to your building, then the existing building code applies. And the first thing that pops into your mind or into your eye as soon as you look at the existing building code is repairs. And Section 4 of the building code applies to repairs. And one of the things that I thought would be most informative for this group is glazing. And what this says, as you can see in 402.1 of the existing building code, if you do any replacement of any glass in a hazardous location, it has to be brought to current code. So for example, if a building was built, let's say back in 1930s, and it has wire glass in it, and that piece of wire glass is broken, you cannot replace it with if it's in a hazardous location, you cannot replace that wire glass with wire glass unless the wire glass has been organically coated and properly tested to comply with either 16 CFR 1201 or ANSI Z97.1. In addition to which, any repair has to maintain the same level of fire protection that was originally provided in the building. Now, the repair doesn't have to bring it up to current code, any of the fire protection features, but it has to maintain the same level of fire protection that was originally intended for that and built into that building. That's Section 403 of the International Building, existing building code. 404 does the same thing in respect to means of egress. Any repair done in an existing building has to maintain the same level of protection for the means of egress that was originally built into that building. Although they vary by jurisdiction, the International Existing Building Code classifies work on existing buildings in one of these categories. First, repairs, that is less than substantial structural damage, and that can be restored to pre-damage condition. The prescriptive path basically is the first of 4 or 3 different work area methodologies. As you'll note, under the work area alterations, you have level 1, level 2, and level 3 alterations we're going to talk about here in a minute. But the prescriptive path is the first work area methodology. And it's really pretty simple. It says that if you're going to use, and by the way, the person who is submitting the proposed changes to the building gets to pick which one they want to do. So you make up your drawings, and you tell the building code inspectors when you present those drawings to change your existing building, I'm going to use the prescriptive path, or I'm going to be using a work area alteration level 1 or level 2, level 3, or I'm going to use the performance path, which is also listed there. But you get to choose. The building owner, architect, designer gets to choose the area that it wants to work on and how it wants to go about making alterations. But the prescriptive path is really pretty simple. It basically says if you're going to make an alteration to the building, you're going to have to bring it to current code. And that is in section 503.1, where it says alterations to any building or structure shall comply with the requirements of the International Building Code for new construction. Additionally, outside the area of the alteration, you must maintain the same level of building code compliance that existed before the alteration. So if your building was built to the building code in 1930, outside of the area of the alteration, you have to maintain that same level of code compliance, but in the new level or in the new alteration, you have to bring that area to current code. So the next level is level 1 alterations. And, oh, there's one other thing I want to mention about the prescriptive path. And that is, what about fire resistance? You know, if you're going to bring it to current code, a lot of code, the current code does 2 things. First of all, it requires sprinklers in a lot of different occupancies. And secondly, where there are sprinklers in a current code, a building built to current code, there are a lot of trade-offs, which means you're allowed to reduce the fire protection features of the building in order basically to fund the cost of the sprinklers. How is that addressed if, for example, the prescriptive path of the existing building code requires you to bring the area of alteration up to current code? Well, there's a specific provision, section 501.2, and it basically says, if you bring your building to current code by adding sprinklers throughout, you can also apply current code to the other areas of the building. In other words, reduce the fire protection features commensurate to those levels that are allowed under current code. But in order to comply, or in order to be eligible for this reduction of fire protection features in an existing building by the use of sprinklers, you have to submit detailed evaluation reports and other data indicating exactly those building elements and materials that the applicant wants the code official to review and approve for a determination of applying current building code fire resistance ratings. So you have to basically survey the entire building, have a professional fire protection engineer, very likely, survey the entire building and bring to the building code official exactly those reductions in fire performance that you want to have as a part of your new or rehabbed building because you're installing sprinklers. And all of those have to be approved by the building code official, the building code authority that is responsible for inspection of the existing building changes. So having said that, we then move on from the prescriptive path to the work area alterations. And there are 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. And they're basically related to the amount of the building that you're going to change. If you're, for example, going to only remove and replace existing materials, equipment, fixtures, put a new furnace in, and move things around a little bit, cosmetic type alterations, that's level 1. And you have to keep all the other areas outside of the level 1 work area the same, but you're probably going to be permitted to restore, by virtue of these alterations, to the same level of protection that was originally put in the building. You're not likely going to have to bring anything up to current code if you're in a level 1 only alteration. If you get into a level 2 alteration, which would include reconfiguration or addition of doors, window systems, or fixtures, and you're changing only less than 50% of the building, you may or may not have to upgrade to current code. It's likely, if you're only changing 50% of the building area, that the building code official is going to do a careful review of the plans changed to that specific work area. And he's either going to say that it does or it doesn't have to come to current code. And the difference will be whether or not it changes the way the remainder of the building, the unaltered area of the building, is affected by the alteration. So if you're negatively affecting the fire resistance ratings of components outside of the work area, you're likely going to have to do some current code work in the alteration area. Likewise, in alteration level 3, that's where you're changing more than 50% of the building. You're likely going to have to upgrade the entire work area to current code. The final path to changing an existing building is the performance path. And that's just like what it sounds. It is an engineering analysis where 19 separate parameters are scored. Then you take all of that to the building code officials and have them review it. And if they agree with your changes and so forth, you will upgrade or not, depending on the scores to the various parameters that are assessed. If you're going to change occupancy of any part of a building, you have to have a new certificate of occupancy. That means during the change and after the change, unless you comply with the existing building code, one of these methodologies, prescriptive, work area, or performance, specific to that change in occupancy, you're not going to get a new certificate of occupancy. Likewise, if you add to the existing building an addition, that has to be brought to current code. That has to be built to current code. Even though the other parts of the building do not have to be brought to current code, all additions have to meet current code. What does all this really mean for the glazing industry? First of all, tragedies do propel changes to the building codes. We see it over and over. We saw it with the tragedy in Cocoa Beach. We saw it after Andrew. We're going to see changes in the building codes resulting from the Surfside building collapse. Interestingly, now that climate change is becoming such a focus of so many people, there are now studies that show that improving the energy efficiency of buildings in the United States could prevent 1,800 to 3,600 premature deaths every single year. And of course, we know that buildings account for approximately 40% of the energy consumed in the United States. And I want to give you an example. My daughter lives in a neighborhood that was built almost entirely in the 1930s. And I walked that neighborhood quite often with her and my grandkids this year. And the thing that struck me was that literally all of the glass and windows in these buildings were monolithic glass and metal frames. And those types of windows were very common before 1960. And even though they're incredibly inefficient, those frames and monolithic glass windows will last 100, maybe 200 years or more. 70% of all the buildings in at least 30 cities throughout the United States were built before 1960 likely using monolithic glass in metal frames. We know that even if you use a double glazed insulating glass unit, the argon gas fill will leak out and the seals are likely to fail in 25 to 30 years. The question becomes, should post-occupancy inspections, after the building code officials have issued a certificate of occupancy, should post-occupancy inspections include window condition and energy loss? If they don't, you're going to continue to see monolithic windows in metal frames in most buildings that were built before 1960 stay with monolithic glass windows. To me, that's not good for the planet. That's not good for the glass industry. It's not good for the folks that make and sell windows. And frankly, it's not good for the building occupants because they're going to be wasting huge amounts of energy. So I leave the industry with that question: should post-occupancy inspections include window condition and energy loss? If we're going to change the building codes to require midlife recertifications of buildings, should it include window condition and energy loss? Here are some links to a number of reports and articles written about the Surfside collapse. It appears that the folks that built the building had built buildings and were in a lot of trouble for building them in Canada, and they moved to Florida. It also looks like the engineering design of the building and the component parts of it, particularly the concrete and rebar in this building, were probably out of code even for the time it was built. So these are some of the links that you have, and at this point, we'll take any questions you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. We had one comment just come in to reiterate what you were saying earlier. Complete performance of the building also relies on proper window and door installations. So comment there to support what you're saying.
Yes.
And one other question that we've also received, can you change the fire protection features of an older building when it is updated or modified?
Okay, it's very important to realize that whatever fire protection features were required at the time of original construction have to be maintained at all times through any alteration of the building. The only exception to that is if you decide, I'm going to reduce those fire protection levels by the use of a sprinkler installation. And that was one of the things I mentioned earlier. When you go to the building code officials and say, I want to reduce the fire resistance ratings throughout my building, and I can do that because I'm going to install sprinklers and bring the sprinkler component of the building to current code, you have to submit a detailed report, probably by a fire protection engineer, that goes through each and every single fire resistance component and material used in that building to justify a reduction in those levels through the use of sprinklers. But if you're not going to use sprinklers to try to reduce the levels, the exact levels that were required when the building was built will be required in the altered building. Question came in, what about code changes for the coming cycle? Yes, code changes are due January of 2022. Chapter 24 of the current building code is up for review and change. We are going to present several changes, proposed changes, significant, I might add, changes to Chapter 24 to the Glazing Industry Code Committee, which is part of NGA. And please, if you have proposed changes that you think ought to be considered in either the structural components of the building code or the Chapter 24 glass provisions, let us know. Thank you.
We appreciate your time today, Tom, bringing us up to speed on this. It's fun to hear about something that's relevant and timely and happening right before our eyes. We've recorded this and we'll be posting it on the on-demand webinars page on glass.org in the coming days, so you can take a look back at this. And of course, Tom, I'm sure you'd be open to questions by email if anything comes up after the fact.
Absolutely. Send me an email or give me a call, whatever you're comfortable with, and I'd be happy to chat about it or respond. Thank you.
Excellent. And everyone, thank you for attending today. Our next Thirsty Thursday is on December 9th. Julie Schimmelpenny with Eastman Chemical Company will be bringing us up to speed on the latest with regard to laminated glass standards. So we appreciate your time today and hope to see you again on December 9th. Have a great afternoon.